What does it mean to be alive? Does it have to do with biological basics of respiration, response, motion, nutrition, and reproduction? Is something alive when it becomes viable on its own? These are questions that have long been debated by scientists, and yet, even with our current technology and our ability to prolong life beyond what we ever have before, we still do not agree with the value or the beginning of life. The Declaration of Independence states human life as one of our most basic rights. Despite this assertion, abortion was legalized in 1973. Since we do not yet agree on when life begins, we skirt around the issue for the sake of convenience. In this speech, I will argue that the government cannot declare that the abortions it permits are illegal if it hasn't first defined when life begins. This is relevant to each of you, not only as American citizens, but as the future determiners of justice. Today I will be discussing the realities of life and death from a legal standpoint. There's no need to be pro-life or pro-choice to gain from this, because instead of focusing on issues of morality, I focused on issues of policy. Problem number 1. The right to life and the defense of the welfare of those who are alive are two standards set up in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Since there is no definition to when life begins, abortion may be violating these standards. Problem number 2. We need a bill or an act that declares when life begins. Legally, there are currently 2 ways that death is pronounced right now in the United States. In order to pronounce a death, a doctor will either, there will be irreversible cessation of circulatory or respiratory functions, or irreversible cessation of all brain function, including the brainstem. These are outlined in the Uniform Determination of Death Act. And my question is, if these determine death, then why does not the initiation of these biological features determine life? According to the U.S. National Library of Medicine, or medlineplus.gov, week 5 is the beginning of the development of the baby's most crucial features. At this point, nerve and blood cells begin to form, and the brain, heart, and spinal cord also begin to form. Weeks 6 and 7 are even more important, because at this point the brain is separated into 5 parts, and cranial nerves are identifiable. The heart is beating and is pumping blood throughout the fetus's body. Here we can see that as early as 5, 6, and 7 weeks, these most crucial features are being developed. The problem is that most abortions take place after these milestones. According to the Guttmacher Institute, a leading research and policy organization that supports a woman's right to choose, a study was done in 2014 that 99% of clinics offered abortions up to 8 weeks. 75% up to 12 weeks, 25% up to 20 weeks, and 10% up to 24 weeks. Though the odds are against them, with our current technology, even as young as a 22-week-old fetus can survive by its own outside the womb. Which leads me to a popular counter-argument, viability. This argument states that a fetus is not alive until it can survive on its own outside the womb. However, if a 3-month-old baby is left alone in the woods and the parents do not care for it, it will also die. Some people are born without the ability to produce insulin, and if man had not found a way to make and distribute insulin, they wouldn't be considered viable in and of themselves either. Does this exclude them from being called alive? Though these arguments are not enough to prove that the viability argument is invalid, they do provide some thought-provoking suggestions that I hope you will consider. Problem number 3. The rights of one individual, the mother, are considered over that of another, the child. Though the government has taken measures to ensure that a woman's rights are considered at the utmost level, they fail to consider a preborn child's right to live by refusing to define that life in a legal context. If no answer exists, we cannot assume that no life exists simply because we have no proof one way or another. You can't deny life if you haven't defined it. If the fetus is not alive up to a certain point, these laws would not apply. However, once the baby is determined to be alive by modern science, the baby and the mother must be afforded same rights. The only exception to this is if the pregnancy is going to kill the mother, and an early inducement must be made to save her life, from which the fetus will not survive. In this case, the death of the fetus is a consequence and not an objective. The solution to this discrepancy is that Roe v. Wade be annulled until the Senate writes and passes an act, like the Uniform Determination of Death Act, that determines the point of human life, and then prohibits all termination of that life after that point. During this transitional period, citizens who do not want to be stuck with children will not be stranded with them. If they are not able to afford children, if they are not emotionally or mentally capable of raising children, or if they just not want kids, adoption will be the legal solution for them. Today I told you about 3 problems with the practice of abortion in the U.S. and explained why it is currently unconstitutional and against the standards set up by our forefathers. Most of my sources were government ones, and to remain credible and relatable to those who might oppose my ideas, I chose organizations that support abortions so I can be considered unbiased. If this report compelled you to reevaluate your stance that you currently hold, or to act upon the one that you have, I request that you follow up with those feelings and research the truth for yourself. This issue is one that affects us all, not just as Americans, but as human beings. Thank you.